Hello and welcome to this video tutorial. I'm Ryan Salway and I will be your instructor. We're going to go over some stuff in Maya here, so we've got Maya open. We're going to take a look at it. One of the things that you're going to notice first when you open Maya is it will probably pop up with this Essential Skills box. The Essential Skills has some nice little movies for rotate, scale, different little abilities that we can do. Very basic information. It's a good idea to take a look at these at some point and look over everything, go through these videos. It's got some pretty useful stuff. Most of what it talks about we're going to be going over anyways, but it's actually made by Autodesk for these little videos, and they're very concise. If you don't want to see this video anymore, you can always go down here and press Do Not Show This at Startup, and that will get rid of that video for you, or this little pop-up, so you won't see that anymore. Now once we're inside Maya, we'll notice a lot of different things with the interface here, and we're going to look at each part of this interface. A few things that you might notice in this interface is up at the top corner we have the menu bar, and what we have with this menu bar, we're going to get into all these different menus and we're going to talk about that. We've got the status line down below the menu bar. Below that we have the shelf and all these little selections within the shelf. We'll talk about that some. We also have the toolbars along the side, as well as our quick layer buttons to choose through here. The main area, the large area that we see, is our panel view. This panel is basically a camera view. You can switch it and you can set up to where you're seeing multiple different camera views at once, or see just a single camera view. Whatever your camera view is, it'll tell you down at the bottom lower corner here, and you can see that it says perspective for this, and you can see that this is our perspective camera view. We also have a timeline. You'll notice that my timeline in this video is more than likely bigger than the timeline that you're seeing in your Maya. I'll show you how you can change the timeline setup and things with that as well. And we also have our time slider, or range slider rather. So we've got our time slider and our range slider, and we'll talk about each of those. Below our range slider is our MEL line, and below that we have our command line. Now, aside from all these different things, we also have an important section along here, along this side. This is our channel box and our layer editor. And with our channel box and layer editor, if we actually put any new geometry in there and see anything happening within this box, we can start to see our attributes. And we get attribute editor that we can come in and make changes throughout the attribute settings here. So we'll look at each of these settings more in depth. Before we get into things too in depth, what I want to show you here with this box is this background area around here is gradient selection. If I deselect this box and I've got my little geometry in there, it's a polygon cube, it's kind of hard for me to see with this gradient background. If you don't like that gradient background, go ahead down here in the lower corner. What we have is the animation preferences, and you notice as I hold my mouse over top of this location, the animation preferences pops up. I can see my little selection, and when I click on this button, I get my preferences pop-up window here. And this pop-up window has quite a few different things, a lot of different settings throughout it. What we're looking for right now is for our actual display. Within our display, down at the very bottom of this, we have a selection for background gradient. We can turn it off and on. With the background gradient here, it's currently on by default in 2011. I'm used to using it without that from 2010. We don't have the gradient turned on by default, and I prefer it that way. So I will turn off that gradient, I'll save those settings, and now when I'm in this, it's just much clearer to me to see that actual box that I've created, even when it's in wireframe mode. So those are some of the basics we've taken a look at, and we'll go in depth with each of these: the menu bar, the status line, the shelf, the toolbox, the quick layout buttons, the time slider, the range slider, the help line, the command line, the panel box with its menus and its shelf here as well, and also the channel box and layer editor. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is our menu bar. Our menu bar is in the top corner. We can see everything set up on our screen. We see File, Edit, Modify, Create, Display, Windows, Assets. With setting up in here, I'm seeing animation, geometry, a lot of different settings in here. And if I click in here, you can see that each one of these has a drop-down menu. There's quite a few menus throughout here. As we drop down, we've got all kinds of different options and things that we can do. Maya can be quite intimidating with all the different options that it has and everything that is open and available to us. And the interesting thing is, with how intimidating this is to us right now with just these amounts of drop-down menus, this isn't even the tip of what Maya can do. You see down here in our status line, we have, currently I am on an animation tab in my status line, first bar there. If I click and hold that little arrow, I can also see polygons, surfaces, dynamics, rendering, and dynamics, and custom. Now this is the student version that I'm taking a look at and showing you here. This is a version that you're going to be working with in my class. So within the animation, polygon, surfaces, if I go down and I select polygons, which is what we're going to be spending most of our time in as we're doing our modeling in polygons, you'll see that my menu bar has changed. So with the menu sets that I have up here, changing through these menu sets of animation, polygon, surfaces, different things like that, each animation set has a different menu bar. And with this having changed, you'll notice that the first 6 icons have stayed the same. I still have File, Edit, Modify, Create, Display, Window. Those have stayed the same. Assets seems to stay the same as well. Let me just double check that. Assets is staying the same. So yes, the first 7, I'd have to double check with the assets when we open them in different settings, such as in render, if that's exactly the same. It seems to be. So the first 7 menu sets are actually staying the same. Everything else is changing. If I'm in animation, my first tab in the menu bar is animation. If I'm in polygons, my first tab after assets is select. And I also have options such as mesh, edit mesh, and things like this. We'll get into each of these options and some of what these different menus do in a later tutorial. That is the basics for the menu bar. We'll take some time looking into that more in depth later. For now, we're going to go ahead and we will move on to the status line. The next thing that we're going to look at is the status line. In the status line, we have the important little drop down for our menu sets with the animation, polygons, different things like that that we were looking at in the menu bar. This is one of the most important things that we see in the status line. However, it does have many other fantastic little buttons and tabs here. Some of them include our rendering abilities, such as rendering the current frame, and we also have options to make certain items selectable or not selectable. So this little icon that I'm highlighting over here says Select Curve Objects with the right mouse button for more info. And I have Select Surface Objects as well. Different things like this. If I'm working with a character, doing character animation, I might have a character that's created in polygons, and we'll get into what polygons are more later. And along with that polygon character, I might have a character set or character control handles that are set up with NURBS, and I'll talk about NURBS more later as well. So if I want to be able to grab just a control handle and move that control handle to animate the character without accidentally messing up the mesh of the character that was designed in polygons, I can select the polygon select tool here, and now if I've got any geometry down in my panel, I won't be able to select that geometry. I'll only be able to select the control handles, and that will keep me from accidentally messing up my polygons. So those are some of the important things that we have here in the menu set, in this status line rather, and we'll play with some of the different things in here with abilities to snap to curve and snap to point. There's also keyboard shortcuts for some of these different things, such as Control C, Control X, and Control V, that we'll look at more in depth later. Next, we'll take a look at the shelf. Within our shelf, we have a lot of different tools, and everything throughout here we can set up with multiple different tabs that the shelf is set up for us. And people over at Autodesk have set up this shelf for us with a lot of different abilities so that we can look at quite a bit of different settings. For what we're going to work with, we're going to stay in the polygons. We may do a little bit of work in the surfaces here now and then, and we may look at the animation tab. However, a lot of the stuff that we see here, I'm also going to show you how to do in our menu bar. As anything that you can do in Maya, there's about 10 different ways to do, and the shelf is a good example of that. As you get more comfortable with Maya, a lot of the professionals turn off their shelf and no longer have this visible because they're just more used to using the menu bar. They find that they have a quicker workflow with using the menu bar. Just an example of that right now, I can click on here with this cube and I can drag out a cube on my screen, and I've got a nice little cube there. Just as easily I can go to my menu bar, hit create, polygon primitives, and hit a cube here, and I can drag out a cube here doing the exact same sort of thing. Now, another nice thing about the menu bar that the shelf doesn't give you is deeper controls. Within the menu bar, if I say create polygon primitive and I come down here, I have interactive creation, and I can turn off that interactive creation. Without interactive creation, I can now create polygon primitive cube, and it automatically creates a cube centered on my grid at 0, 0, 0. It is a 1 by 1 cube. It's perfectly cubed, no discrepancies such as this cube here has with odd shapes and different things. And to get a better view of that, I'm going to go ahead and press F5. I'll show you that later, just to give me a shaded view. And I can see this perfectly shaped cube. This one is fairly close, but it was hand-drawn, so it's probably not perfect, and this one is quite imperfect. And you can easily see that. And that was easy to figure out by turning on my polygon primitive interactive creation. That's something that if you're going for very specific dynamics and you need very specific measurements, make sure you turn off the interactive creation, because you're going to want to be able to do your mathematics in your attribute editor and set things up very specifically. Once I do have the interactive creation set up and turned off, which I can do within my menu set, I can now go ahead in my shelf and I can create a cube, and it will automatically create that cube with a 1 to 1 of a 0, 0, 0 for the X, Y, Z axis, and we've got everything set there. So the setup, once it is put into place with the interactive creation turned off or on, will make it possible for creating those either through the menu bar or through your shelf. However, you cannot change that setting within the shelf to turn off or on active interactive creation. At least nothing is set up there for any of these buttons to quickly do that. So that is our shelf, and for now, as I mentioned, we aren't going to be looking at all these other tabs within the shelf. We're going to focus on the polygons. We're going to be looking at these basic shapes of the polygon sphere, the cube, the cylinder, cone, plane, torus, pyramid, and the pipe. And we'll use some of these for a little bit, and then we're going to get into more in-depth modeling later. For your first assignment, you'll just be using these few buttons within the shelf. If you are comfortable, you can also go into the Create Polygon Primitives and use these items in the same location here from the Polygon Primitives, creating further items such as the helix and the soccer ball. Moving on, we now have the Toolbox. The Toolbox has all of our basic tools and most common tools that we're going to use. The top item here for the arrow, this is our Select tool. If you have the Select tool, you can easily and quickly move between multiple different items. Really, even if you have a Move tool, you can use it basically to select items as well. The Select tool just gives us deeper control. So, we have a Lasso Select tool that we can move around and grab different items as well, grabbing multiple different items, carefully selecting around so that we don't get all items. We also have our Paint Selection tool, to where we can paint specific vertices and points, which we'll talk about later. Some of these important tools that we have include the Move tool, and the Move tool is what gives us the ability on any object to move along our Z-axis or Z, our X-axis, and our Y-axis. You can see these axes down in the lower corner. We have Z is always blue, Y is green, X is red, and if we're looking at these on our corresponding item that we've selected, grabbing this piece of geometry, I now have blue for my X, red for my, blue for my Z or Z, X for my, or red for X, and yellow is currently selected, and that is a Y. If I select a different color, whatever direction that I have selected will turn to a yellow color. The other colors will correspond to the colors visible in this lower corner. For the X, Y, Z, and that's going to give us our coordinates. We also have a rotate tool. In our rotation tool, it's the same basic concept where we have the red, blue, green. We also have a yellow bar on the outside. If we grab the yellow, we can rotate in all kinds of haphazardous ways, spinning around according to our camera view. If we're grabbing in the very middle, we can grab and move around with no particular rhyme or reason. Go ahead and hit Control Z to undo that. If we grab carefully on the red and we see that red bar turn yellow for the selection that we have, we are now moving along the x-axis, rotating it around that x-axis. It might look like it's moving on the z-axis, however it's actually rotating around the x-axis. Same thing if we grab this blue line, it turns yellow. That is our z-axis, our z, and we're now rotating around on the z. We can also grab the y-axis and similarly rotate it around on the y-axis. So all these are handy controls. We also have the scale tool. Within the scale tool that we have here off to the side in our toolbox, we have similar selections where we can scale in one direction at a time for each of these different axes or axi. How do you say that when it's multiple? Regardless, you can scale it in each different direction. And we also have a center selection here. And the center selection in that light blue, as we grab it, it turns yellow just as everything else does. And now we can scale in all directions. So, useful tool there. And quite usefully, while we have these little buttons over here, and it seems like it might be quick and easy to get to these buttons, we also have keyboard shortcuts. It may seem like it's an advanced method to use keyboard shortcuts, however, it's quite useful to learn as soon as you get into Maya. Start using keyboard shortcuts to speed up your workflow. If we hit W, we have the Move tool. If we hit E, we have the Rotate tool. If we hit R, we have the Scale tool. Q will also give us our Select tool. If we hit T, it's going to show our Manipulator tool. So as you can see, if I'm on the X or W, E, or R for Move, Rotate, or Scale, if I hit T, it hides or displays my my manipulator tool in most cases. We also have Y. If you're looking across the top of a QWERTY keyboard, those are the top first keys, Q, W, E, R, T, Y, QWERTY. And if you hit the Y, it'll select the previously selected tool other than the Q, W, E, R, and T. So my previously selected tool was the polygon tool. It's been quite a while since I last touched the polygon tool, but that was the last actual tool that I used outside of the Q, W, E, R, T, or my Move, Rotate, Select, and Scale. So when we hit the Y button, it allows me then to create a new box here. And then when I'm done with that, it goes back to the previously selected tool which I had, which was Rotate. So there we have a number of cubes. We'll go ahead and leave those on screen for just a moment, and we'll take a look now at what it looks like in our next section here of our interface, which is excuse me, our quick layout buttons. The quick layout buttons are set up in such a way that they are the most common layouts that we use. You can certainly create your own layouts, and you can create new layouts according to the workflow that you find most easy, but these basic layouts are set up for common tools. The first layout, which is the default, is your perspective view. In perspective view, that's exactly what we're seeing here in this panel. We're seeing everything from a camera angle that gives us perspective. One layout below that is our foreview. In our foreview, we see the top view, a front view, a side view, and our perspective view. This can be especially handy when we're trying to line things up, and if we're seeing things such as this cube here that isn't necessarily actually lined up on a ground plane, if we're using our grid as a ground plane, from the front view we might need to move things up here, and you'll see that as I'm moving this, it's moving in the other views as well. The top view, I'm moving on the y-axis, so you don't see anything changing. It's not changing in perspective, it's not getting bigger with the top view there, but in our side view, in our front view, and in our perspective view, you can see this box moving. So we'll line this up here. Another thing that you may notice is that we have everything within these views for our top view, our front view, and from our side view is in wireframe. However, in our perspective view, it's currently in a shaded mode. That's because each one of these panels has their own individual menu bars and individual shelves, which we'll talk about later, and we'll see how we can change each one of these views to look however we want, setting them up with different modes between wire mode and shaded mode. If we have textures, we can even put on textures, or we can put in lighting if we have lights, and we'll see how that can all be done. For now, getting back over to our layout buttons, we're going to see also a layout here for the perspective and the outliner. The outliner tells us each of the items that we have. I've got my polygon cubes. Each one of them hasn't been named specifically, so it just has a default name of P cube 1, P cube 2, P cube 3, P cube 4, and 5. The P is just simply telling me that this is a polygon. It's not a surface or a NURB. It's a polygon cube, and it labels each one of them in order. If I were to start manipulating this and actually creating a scene out of this, maybe I'd turn one of these into, say, a desk or a chair, turning polygon cubes into simple walls, and I would want to make sure that each of these items are named so that I don't get confused as I'm moving about between these different items. Below this, with the outliner, we have another view mode, which is the perspective and the graph. This is used especially in animation. If I have a piece of geometry here and I hit S to create a keyframe, move my time slider along and create a secondary keyframe, you can see that the graph lines things up in here, and it's showing me how things are moving on each of my primary axes. If I look at a single axis on the side, I can see that it's moving just along the z-axis. If I'm looking at all axes, I can see everything is completely straight and flat for the rest of these axes, as it isn't really moving in those directions. However, as soon as I grab something else and move it, say for instance I come to frame 12, I'll move this over in another direction and hit S to keyframe that. We now have this arch in our graph editor showing the movement of how that's going to move if we slide along that time slider and how that movement is happening. So we'll get more into the graph editor and talk about that as we get into animation. Our next view here is our Hypershade and perspective. The Hypershade is specifically for our colors. So give it a moment to load here, and here we have our Hypershade. Lots of different shades that are presets throughout here, all kinds of different information. It's very tempting to go in here and start playing with everything. Don't. We don't want to play with everything and mess around until we know more of what we're doing, especially not in any assignments. If you're going to do something on your own time, you can play around with it. Just don't break Maya. In the meantime, what you have is some basic things that we're going to be using, such as the blend and the Lambert. So by clicking on each of these, I've just created a blend here and a Lambert. I'm going to select this blend, and let me go ahead and grab some geometry in my perspective mode. By right-clicking on this blend, I can say Assign to Selected. So I've just assigned this material to this polygon here, that bit of geometry, and I'll take this bit of geometry here, and for this geometry I'm going to assign this Lambert. Make sure I've got that selected there, assign that Lambert. So now I've got this showing as a blend and this is a Lambert. You can't really tell in my view here. I'll go ahead and I'll grab one more item, and I'm going to, well, let's grab this item over here. I'm going to assign this one to this blend as well. Again, you can't really see anything that's happening. The simple reason for that is because I'm not set up in a view mode that allows me to see my textures that I'm creating within my Hypershader. So to change my view modes, we'll get more into this with panels, but there are some buttons up here. There are also keyboard shortcuts that we'll talk about later. But if I do turn on some modes to where I can actually see the changes, we should be able to see the applied Lamberts here. And with the cube, we might not see anything with the color because I don't have any light in here to cause anything. These are pretty basic shapes, so they don't have anything shining on them. The Lambert and the blend might look exactly the same at this point. I can, however, come in here. If I double-click on this blend, in my attribute editor, it pops up and it goes directly to that blend for this color. I have a slider that I can change, and now we're seeing the changes in our perspective view as we're making enough of a change that this is different from the blend. And we can put in some actual color here. By double-clicking right on this color location here, we open up our color selector, and we have some options to change its hue and its value, some of its different saturation and its colors, different things in here, with either RGB modes or HSV modes. A lot of different options of ways to change the color. There's even, outside of the color selection this way, there's little selections along the side here, and if I were to come in here, I have the option to actually add some presets such as cloth or checkers, mountain images, different things like that, or I can add a file adding specific images and textures that I create myself. I can even add movie files. If you try to add a movie now, I can guarantee it's not going to work for you, as there's some extra steps that you don't yet know for adding in such things as movies and files. So we'll get into that as we talk more about the Hypershader and have an actual lesson on texturing. So we've got the basics there. For now, you're probably going to want to stick with just basic color changing, with clicking into the color and changing there. I'm going to go ahead, we'll change my Lambert color as well. We'll just make this a simple blue, and we'll see how that works. Maybe make it a little bit darker just for the fun of it. I'm not really creating anything here. But you can see how this has changed, and you can also see that this one blend is affecting two different polygon cubes. And so you can assign materials to multiple different objects. You can also leave objects with assigned to a single color, and we can have these objects here. We'll notice they don't have any color. They're actually using the default Lambert, and when we have the default Lambert, default shaders in here, we don't ever want to change these default colors. Whenever you're creating a new color, don't select the color up here to change the color. Select the color here first, create a new color, and set up the color. Once these colors have been created, we know that these are colors that I've created. I can select them in here, and we can always go in and we can change these. So I've got a blend here. I can always come in and I can change its name in my attribute editor to say such things as simple, change the name to say red blend. Maybe I'll use some camel casing here for the code, which I'll talk about more later. Lowercase r, uppercase b for the blend. It's red blend 1. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit enter, and I've got that saved. That's now named red blend 1. I've still got this one named Lambert 2. If I was doing an actual project, I would want to make sure that I rename all of these. If I'm working with a brick wall, I'm going to call this brick texture or brick blend, brick Lambert, depending on whether I want it to have any shininess to it or the ability to have a look of wetness on the brick with a blend, or more dull brick with the Lambert. Moving on from that mode, we have another mode. Most of the modes that we've looked at for our quick layout buttons have been simple dual camera modes between two different panels. This mode is a 3-panel mode, and if we click on that, what we get is our perspective view. Here we have our hyper graph, or rather that's our hyper graph, and here we have our graph editor. And so multiple different views, we can change that around. We can also create our own views. We can create and save views, which we'll talk about later. Within this method and this view, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go back and look at one mode at a time. And with one mode, we can move on and we can take a look at the panel itself. Within panels, we have our own little menu. Just as we have the menu at the very top, this menu is specific to the panel. If we have multiple panels open, each panel has its own menu, and we have different options for viewing, shading, lighting, different things that we can show. I can turn off the visibility of polygons and excuse me, make all my polygons disappear there. If I need to see everything, we can make sure that we have that visible as well. And I can also change my perspective. Even though I'm in one single view, I can come in here to my panels view and maybe pick a orthoscopic side view. And I'm seeing just a side view. I'm seeing it in a textured view with pretty dull, flat lights. Not very interesting, but it's something that I can do if I need to line things up and take a quicker look at things on a large scale. So we'll go ahead and we'll take this one back to this perspective view. One other thing to note is if we are in a view such as this 4 view, where I'm seeing my top view, my perspective view, my front view, and my side view, each one that I click in, you'll see I get a slight border around it to know which view I'm actually working in according to where I've clicked. And if I have clicked in this view and I hit my space bar, it's going to make that my primary view. I'm going to see that as a large view. I can hit my space bar again and go back to my previous view of my 4 view. So just something to note there. Along with these panels and these different options, it also has basically a mini shelf. Just as a shelf that we looked up here for creating our polygon shapes, this shelf gives us some quick buttons with nice little graphical icons. We have icons for the wireframe mode, for our smooth shade all, our wireframe on the shade, our textured mode, our lights, shadows, and high quality renders, different things like that. Now these modes can also be accessed with our number key. If I hit 4 with the keyboard shortcut, I go into wireframe mode. Button 5 on the top of my keys or on a number pad will take me to a basic shaded view. If I hit 6, I can get the actual textures if I've got more complex textures on there. I don't have any real textures necessarily showing, so let me see what I've got here. Let's go ahead and just quickly throw out a texture to see the difference between those two views. I'm going to open up the hypergraph panel that we looked at earlier. I'll just create a simple Lambert, and I'm going to put in a preset of just a checker pattern. So with this preset checker pattern, I'll place it on this item here, and you can see it just went gray. No real visibility of that checker pattern because I don't have on my texture view. But if I hit 6 or this texture button at the top of my little mini shelf, I can see its textured view. 5 giving me a shaded view, 6 giving me an actual textured view for more complex textures, such as if you've added an image. If I hit 7, I'm going to get my lighting view. And you'll notice everything turns completely black. It's simply because I don't have any lights. I'll quickly create just a simple point light, and we can see that if I move this light around in the scene, we can see how that light affects the scene actively within everything that's going on, and we can see that basic movement. We can see how that light is affecting everything because we're in the lighted view. If I come out of our lighted view back into just a basic texture view with button 6, we no longer have that light affecting anything. If I go to F5 showing just basic textures or basic shades, I'm not going to see my textures. And if I press F7 again, I've got kind of the light on there without the texture, so I can combine these things, kind of mixing back and forth with how I've got light or no light, or I've got texture or just basic shades through buttons 5, 6, and 7, or going all the way back down to wireframe if I need to do some modeling there in my wireframe mode by hitting button 4. So we'll go ahead and we'll delete that light for now, as I don't need it for anything else in this demo, but I can show you how we've got these extra modes with different lights and things. Key thing that you're going to keep in mind for these modes so are buttons 4, 5, and 6. Another thing about the panel is within the panel, everything that you do, this is where all the magic in mind happens. This is where all your work takes place and what you can see. So if I hit in this area, so far we've kept it very basic. We've looked at this single area What if I need to see the back side of this? Even if I go into my 4 view, I might not necessarily be able to tell, am I in the front, back side, different things like that. When I'm looking at the top, front side, what side is it looking at? What am I really paying attention to with something as simple as these cubes? So if we want to, we can hit the Alt button, and with our right mouse button, we can zoom in and out. With our middle mouse button and holding Alt, we can slide side to side, and I've got everything selected, so it's actually sliding the options rather than actually properly panning the view. But there we have it properly with nothing selected. We can move our view, moving around. That's the middle mouse button. Again, zoom in and out is the right mouse button. You can also use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. It's not as precise as Alt and the right mouse button. And our left mouse button. Our left mouse button allows us to tumble, and we can rotate around in our view and get a better view of different parts of our model so that we can see what we're doing and what we're working with. So very handy things to do with our right mouse button, our middle mouse button, and our left mouse button, while simultaneously holding the Alt button. That Alt button is a very important shortcut key to use with your mouse button. So some of the shortcuts that we've looked at so far include the Q, W, E, R, T, Y, QWERTY, primarily the W, E, and R for our move, rotate, and scale. We've also looked at keyboard shortcuts including 4, 5, and 6 for some of our shaded modes, 7 if we need light in there, and holding the Alt button while tumbling, rotating, scaling our actual camera view in our panel. We can also take a look at some other keyboard shortcuts. If I have an item selected, if I hit 1, I'm in a basic smoothness mode. Nothing has changed for this at this point. If I hit 2, I can see this with a smooth shader applied. I am also seeing the hole. Just like a ship's hole, this area is an outside selection, and I can actually go in and I can grab onto the hole and move it according to the hole as well as to the shaded object. Or if I hit 3, I get just a smoothed object that allows me to manipulate that smoothed object. I can hit 1 and go back to my basic shaded mode. These are just basic working modes. It's not necessarily for rendering or for final production for the smoothness. It's just to see how things are going to work as you're doing box modeling, smoothing things out before you actually go ahead and apply smooth attributes that we will talk about as we get further into the modeling. So those are some of the basic things with the panel. Next we'll take a look at the attribute editor. In the attribute editor, if I have something selected such as this polygon cube that we were just looking at, I can take a look here, and it's not much of anything of interest happening here at this point. I can take a look at my tessellation, and I can open up all these different menus and see just a plethora of information on this polygon. I'm in the P-Cube Shape 1 information tab. I want to go over to P-Cube 1. P-Cube 1 is where it has all the information that I really need, such as a name. If I want to change this, I can just call this, I'll call this one Basic Cube. And again, I'm using camel case with the first word lowercase, any word thereafter, first letter uppercase. So I've got Basic Cube. I've just renamed this. If I were to look at this in my excuse me, in my outliner, I can see that it's now labeled Basic Cube. I've got Cube 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the only one that I've renamed as Basic Cube. I've renamed it here. I could have renamed it in my outliner as well. I also have my translation. The translation is its position. Each of these are lined up in an order X, Y, Z. We've got our X, Y, Z order here, and we're set up. If I were to set this one to 0, we can see that it moves over to the 0 axis there. If I have anything in here, I can type in any number that I want, moving that around to shape shift it. I can move it on the positive and on the negative simply by selecting them here. I can also grab in there, and while middle mouse clicking, let me get back in there, if I'm selected here and I middle mouse click in my panel, I can slide on there, and you'll see that my number is changing as well as my box is moving as I middle mouse click. Same thing happens with the rotate. I can, if Maya doesn't freeze up on me, I can grab and I can rotate and move things around. Oh, come on, Maya. Work with me. I promise it's true. I can also come in here and I can type things into the rotate and rotate things on different axes, put it at different degrees, as well as using my tools menu or my keyboard shortcuts, E. Come on, work for me. Don't freeze. I see what's happening. There we go. I was typing when I still had this box selected, so that's something to watch out for. If you type in here, it's going to put your letters in here rather than actually affecting what you're selecting in the main box. So out here, if I hit E, it goes to my rotate tool. In there, it was just typing. So I can rotate in here, and you can see that those numbers are changing in my attribute editor. So these are different numbers that we can control through the attribute editor or through our panels by moving things around. If we need very precise movements, we want to use our attribute editor. If we're working on animation, we need to be careful that things aren't getting stuck in gimbal lock that we'll discuss later, or over-rotating beyond 360-degree rotations and causing problems. We can look at it here. Similarly, we have our scale in this location and other primary attributes. These are not all the attributes, these are just some of the most commonly used attributes. We'll also notice in the attribute editor with these tabs, we also have tabs such as our blend that is applied to it. So we can come over here, select this tab, and we can always go back into this color, and we can change this color at any point. Now, remember, if that color was selected on two items, if I change that color, even in that attribute editor here, it's going to change that color for all items that are using that blend. So if multiple cubes had been using that blend, all of them would have just changed color. And that's the basics for the attribute editor. We'll now take a look at our time slider. In our time slider, I've already put some animation in as we were working earlier. Very basic, simple animation, nothing impressive. When we have any item selected, we see in red where the keyframes are. Your keyframes might not be this bright or this large when you first get into Maya. The time slider is defaulted to 24 seconds, or excuse me, 24 frames. 24 frames is the default for 1 second in film. If you're looking at video, it's 39 frames per second, or drop 30, 29.97. For film, you're looking at 24 frames per second. Now, if you are having a hard time looking at your time slider and everything's kind of small and it's hard to see, there's a nice little option right over here in this lower corner. There's a key here that you can turn on auto keying, that if I ever move anything, it'll automatically set a key at whatever frame I'm at. And right next to that is our animation preferences. In animation preferences, if I open that up, and I've got all these different settings, many times it'll probably open up to basic settings here, or maybe this animation window when you hit that. But I've got it set up where I'm looking at my time slider. In my time slider, I have the key tick size set to 4. That makes these little red tick marks a bit larger so that I can see them easier and manipulate them there. I also have the height of my time slider times 2. If I hit it times 4, you can see I've got a very large time slider. If I hit times 1, this is a default time slider that you're probably seeing when you first open Maya. If I hit it to times 2, this is the slider that I prefer to use. It gives me just a little bit more room to see everything and to manipulate my animation clearly. Other things that you'll see in your settings here are things such as this playback speed. Real time 24 frames per second is what I have set up. By default, you may have it set to play every frame. If it's playing every frame, it may not be playing at real time, as it has to go through different render times, and the software is trying to do a lot of mathematics to show you what it has. It's going to play every single frame and make it nice and clear for you. If you make it real time, it might cut out a little bit of your animation here and there, as it doesn't have enough RAM to render it on some of these machines, but the real time 24 frames per second is going to show you the actual animation closest to the way that it should be seen, even if you have to kind of scrub through it. And this is scrubbing, grabbing your time slide header and moving it back and forth, we're scrubbing it, and when we hit play, it's going to actually play that animation. So I've got it set real time 24 frames per second. I've got my key ticks active so that I can see those. The key tick size is set to 4, and my height is 2 times. I also have snapping turned on. This is helpful, and we'll explain more of the snapping later. But the snapping works with our keyframes so that we don't end up with some keyframe on 1 1/4 keys rather than right at, right on the key. So I've got everything set there the way that I want. I can go ahead and I can save it and close that window out. And now I've got my time slider. I'm moving along. You see a nice clean time slider. If I select anything that has animation, you see those red tick marks appear, and we can move along and see where those are. If I hit my play button, it's going to just loop between that 24 frames, which is 1 second. Now, if I need to see more than 1 second, which I definitely at some point will, because every animation that I've ever seen has lasted more than 1 second. It's pretty dull to see, going to see a cartoon or pay to see a movie, and it lasts 1 second. You certainly wouldn't want to have that. We need to change the amount of time so that we can add on different scenes. We may need to be able to see more time. I've got my range slider, and if I pull out my range slider, I can see that it defaults to 48 frames per second. So I've got a whole 2 seconds here. I'll just go ahead and grab that. Don't worry about how I'm doing that yet. I can show you this stuff later. So now I've got everything moved around here, and now I've just extended the time. My animation now has slowed down and happens on 2 seconds instead of 1. Still not very useful for long-run animation, but it's nice to know what the time slider does. And what the range slider does here was showing how much of this I'm going to be able to view. Now as I move my range slider, you may notice this number here changing next to the range slider. That range slider number is showing me how many frames I have visible in my time slider according to the range that I'm viewing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this range slider to 24. And I can just type that right in there. I'm seeing that 1 second again, and so I'm halfway through my animation at 1 second. Now, say I want to extend my animation. I want to have more than 1 second. We'll say put it to 96 frames, make it a few more seconds here. I can change it here in my time slider, or my time slider is here for these numbers, or I can change it in my range slider. I'm going to go ahead and change it in my range slider so you can see what happens there. I put that to 96 frames. It went ahead and extended all the way out. I've got my range slider all the way out, and my timeline has expanded to 96 seconds. Now, if I were to change this timeline, we'll just go ahead and put that to 1,000 frames. It didn't expand my timeline. I changed my timeline, but it didn't extend it here. The reason for that is because while I have the extra time, you notice my time slider, or my range selector, shrunk. In my range slider here, I can now slide it all the way across to those 1,000 frames, but I'm still only looking at about 4 seconds at a time, which is useful because if I slide it all the way out here, now it's kind of hard to tell where these keyframes are. Is this keyframe at 20? It says 20 up above. I just clicked in here. It says 25, 24. It's kind of hard seeing that little white button where exactly my frame is. So if I have my range slider and I pull that down in closer, now I can really see where exactly these are. This frame is on frame 24. I can see that. This frame is on frame 48 or 49 actually, and I can see that here. This frame is on frame 1. I can go into negatives here. If I need to, I can set up things in the negative, and that just matters on how I'm going to render if I'm going to see that animation that was done in the negative. But my range slider allows me to then come in and really manipulate things on the small level, or these things for the entire level of the animation, and it allows me to move from side to side and see as I slide through the range of my entire animation. If I'm sliding in my animation here, I can push at the end here. I can't go any further than that. And that's as far as I can go until I extend my range here, and then I can slide further. Or if I have my range slider open up, then I can slide all the way through, but it's kind of hard to see what level of animation I'm doing. So that is both the time slider and the range slider. We'll now move on and take a look at the MEL. MEL is something that we won't be doing a lot of in this class, if anything. If we have any MEL, I will probably just give you some code that you can plug in. The basic idea of the MEL is if I come in here and I type something, for instance, such as delete and hit enter, I've just deleted the selected item. Now if I type in cube and hit enter, cannot find procedure cube. It doesn't understand that code. So you have to make code that it actually understands, such as sphere. So if I type in sphere, I've now just created a sphere. And let me go ahead and we'll move that sphere off to the side here. Now, this sphere is a polygon sphere, or excuse me, a NURB sphere. And if I create a polygon sphere here, we can kind of see the difference between the two with the way that the geometry is set up. We'll talk about polygons and NURBs and the differences, but when I typed in the MEL codes for sphere, it created a polygon sphere. You might be able to try code such as p sphere and see if that creates a polygon sphere. No, it doesn't like that. It might be case sensitive. We can try different things like uppercase S, try that. No, it doesn't like that either. So the thing with the code is, if you don't know the code, it's not that useful. And we're not going to get into the code. So you don't really have to worry too much about the MEL script. What you may want to take a look at is next to the MEL script with the error codes and the different information that it gives you in sort of a status line. And below this, we also have our current command line. So in the command line, if I have this sphere selected, it's a polygon sphere, and I've got it selected with my translate tool, my move tool, I'm seeing different selection abilities, and it tells me down in my command line a little tip. It says move tool, use manipulator to move objects, use edit mode to change pivots. Now, it's pretty basic with something like a move tool. I already know what the move tool does, so I don't need to read that command line. But if I'm using something more complex that has multiple steps, such as an extrude, and let's say I grab, and don't worry about how I'm doing this, we'll get into this later, but let's say I grab a face, and we've grabbed a single face, and I'm going to tell that, that mesh there to, let's extrude it. Now, down in the lower corner, I've hit the extrude, and my command line down there is telling me, show manipulator tool, use manipulators to edit selected object. If I pull out this extrude, it tells me how far it's being pulled out. It gives me different information, and I can kind of mess around with it and play with it. And sometimes it's going to tell me very specific instructions when I have a tool, especially a tool that has multiple different steps to use. If I select a face and tell it to do something, it's going to tell me the next step to do. If I hit G, which is a command shortcut, you'll see I've got one area down here saying results polygon extrude face 3. I've got my manipulator tool that's selected, and I can extrude that out. And basically what I did with G for my keyboard shortcut was it repeats the previous command that I had created. And it's specific commands such as the extrude or insert edge loops, different things like that. And we'll talk about all of that in our next lesson as we get into actual modeling. For now, you know the basics of the interface. You've taken a look at all of the primary objects here within these things, including the menu bar, the status line, the shelf, the toolbox, the quick layout buttons, the panels, your attribute editor, your time slider and range slider, as well as your MEL and your command line. These are the basic things that you're going to be working with, and primarily what I want you to do is go ahead and take a look for this first bit at the polygons. Taking a look at these polygons, go ahead and start creating something simply by creating polygons. We create some polygons in here and move them around. You can create multiple different items and objects and start just using basic building blocks and play with them kind of as if they're Legos. Line them up with one another and see if you can create something. Create a car, an animal, whatever you'd like, using just basic shapes with cubes, spheres, polygon cylinders, things such as that, and see what you can create, much like a Lego construction. And next lesson, we'll get into in-depth modeling techniques using, or more in-depth modeling techniques using such things as the extrude and edge loops. So until then, enjoy the program and get used to the interface and how to move through it.